Hey, what's up YouTube, Scabadger here. We're back with something completely new today, and I'm going to call this Versus. So the concept is pretty simple. I have a fleet of ships, King has a fleet of ships, and there's a little bit of an objective to it. So my goal is to sink his invasion fleet, which we can see down here. His goal is to get it across the Atlantic Ocean. So we'll come to that sort of stuff in a second, but I just want to talk about the fleet makeup and why we've gone for the options we have. So you'll notice that both our main fleets are completely identical. We chose these fleets so that it would be relatively fair and neither of us would have an advantage. Within the scenario that we're going for, neither of us were really prepared for the objective we faced. Very rarely does a situation arise and you have a fleet specialized just for it. So our main fleets are the exact same, consisting of 3 battleships, 3 carriers, 5 cruisers, 9 destroyers, and 8 submarines. So it's a pretty diverse group. Like I said before, it can handle any situation. It also happens to be the fleet configuration I use in all my games. Where we do go down a different track though is our carrier based aircraft. So within the scenario we're not allowed to use land based runways and we have to purely stick to our carriers. You notice that King Congo has gone for a 50-50 split between naval bombers and interceptors, while I've gone for interceptors, tactical bombers, and naval bombers. Now, within this situation, it does make sense that you would go for naval bombers as they can deal damage to ships, but I've taken a compromise and taken less of interceptors and naval bombers, instead taken tactical bombers to increase the scouting range of my craft. So, for me, within the scenario, it is really important that I can scout. Not only do I have to sink the invasion fleet, which we can see down here, which consists of 20 convoys, 2 destroyers, 2 submarines, I also have to find it first. So, while King Congo can afford a little shorter range and compromise that for air superiority and for the ability to damage my fleet, I have to find his group first before I can deal any damage. So, interceptors, they're just to mess with his. Tactical bombers, they will do the long range scouting, and naval bombers, they can cover a lot of distance and space up close, so they can do a lot of close to my ships scouting and protect me from submarines. It's also worth pointing out at this point that due to the game we're playing at the moment, I have elite aircraft and King does not, so I have the advantage there in terms of my interceptors, tactical bombers, and naval bombers are higher level than his. Now, on the flip side, he does have superior battleships and I believe cruisers. He does have elite versions of those, so we need to be mindful of that. Now, what that does mean is that his fleet will be faster than mine, so I do have to be careful going into this, that if his fleet does find mine, that I am very careful in how I run, because he will catch me. So with that out of the way, let's go onto the map and start planning how we're going to go about this. So before we even jump into the game, it's important that we plan this out and figure out what we actually have to do. So we have to stop King's invasion fleet that will start in the area highlighted as yellow from reaching the United Kingdom. Now on the other side of the Atlantic, around the United Kingdom and Spain, highlighted in red is the area that his main battle fleet can start. So keeping that in mind, we need to position our fleet in such a way that we can find his invasion fleet before it can meet up with his main fleet. Now, to do this, I actually have to split my main group into 2 so I can scout the whole area effectively. Now, we'll come back to this point later on, but in hindsight, I do go about this the wrong way. So, how I do go about it in the gameplay you're about to see is I deploy the majority of my ships, so basically 2/3, in the mid-Atlantic, so basically on the border between the southern and northern United States, just out. Within the limits of the game we're playing in the rules, I can't be inside the area highlighted in yellow, I have to start outside. Now I deploy the other 1/3 further down towards the south, basically in the mid-Atlantic Ocean. So what that means is I will then have enough scouting range of my aircraft to cover that area effectively. So that's the plan. We need to find these ships before they can meet up with his fleet, and we need to sink them before his fleet can get there and reinforce. So you'll see where I place my ships in a second, and we'll talk about that a bit more when we get there. But it's really important that we find these ships straight away and we don't let them through. The reason we're splitting is so that we can scan it out and then we can intercept them. His convoys are faster than our ships, so unless we find them straight away, we won't be able to intercept. He's running very high level convoys and they will be able to outrun us. So with that in mind, let's go on to the actual gameplay and see how I go about this. So already within the first 20 minutes of the battle, my aircraft are out and they're scouting. Now at this point, just due to the range and the ability in my placement, I've already scouted the upper section of the area his convoy can start. But the problem with that is now I have all these redundant aircraft that I can't use, that are just going to be sitting on a carrier's deck. So this is what I was talking about earlier, is I possibly deployed too much of my forces in the northern regions to scout out that area. As you can see here, I'm already redeploying them because they're already done. Meanwhile, down here in the south, you can see that my forces are quite spread out, and in fact, I don't have enough aircraft to effectively scout the region. So what I'm doing with this destroyer at the moment is I'm checking out where the enemy convoy could be. Now that point there on the corner under the tactical bomber, it was possible it started there. Now at this point it's only a few hours into the gameplay, so I'm seeing where the destroyer could have gotten to within the hour, and that will give us a rough estimate of where he could be. So that's what I'm doing there. I'm using that destroyer to path out where I think he could be. It's worth keeping in mind, and we'll come back to this point later on, that I actually kind of stuff up here, and due to how I deploy my aircraft, things would have gone differently. So we're back a little bit later on, and what I'm basically showing here is losses. Egypt found a smaller group and began bombing it and attacking it with naval bombers to eliminate it and disrupt its operations. So as we can see there, it has taken a little bit of damage, but it's still operating fine. He took more casualties than we did. So what I'm doing here is I'm moving it back across. I'm sending it to be in range with the other battle group so that can provide air support. Now I only have one tactical bomber out scouting at the moment, and ultimately he achieved his goal here, and that was to shut down my scouting operations. And this will be another point to highlight later on. So our naval bombers have located some submarines, and we've pulled them back. We can still see their path, but it's good to pull these naval bombers back so we don't give away our position as well. As we can see here, there are two submarines moving up, kind of in a scouting formation almost, although if they were scouting they'd be closer. Now I misinterpret the position of these submarines as though they're escorting a group, specifically the invasion group that I'm meant to be hunting. So I kind of make a bit of a mistake here and target them. Now, I don't realize this until later on after the game, but that's not their purpose. I assume their purpose is to distract me, which they do incredibly well. So you can see I'm using a submarine here to gauge where they've traveled from. At this point, I know the game's been going for X amount of time, so if I use my submarines that are of the same level, I can see how far they could have traveled within the amount of time that's passed in the game, thus giving me a rough estimate of where they are. Now at the same time I'm doing this, I'm also lining up and getting ready to sink the submarines. Now the reason I want to do this is less units I may have to fight later on. Once again, with that other sub, I'm also lining it up and seeing how far it could have traveled. At this point I'm pretty sure it could have traveled about for 4 to 5 hours worth, although I'm recording this in post, so I'm not entirely sure. One thing that's worth noting too is at this point my aircraft are still out scouting, but I'm starting to lose a few to King Kongo's Air Force, and I don't realize this until later on, but he's actually slowly picking my aircraft off, especially the ones in the northern regions. So the ones in the south, southwest are actually pretty safe, they're out of range, but I slowly start to notice that I'm ending up with less and less aircraft, and that's where they're going. I don't lose too many to this, but I do lose a few. So it's worth actually watching your aircraft guys and seeing where they're at. Change their positions often and frequently so they don't get spotted, and that is a good place to start. So move your aircraft, keep them moving, and keep scouting. A little bit of time has passed, we sunk those submarines successfully, but we also took a little bit of hammering from the air. As you can see, I've got those 5 interceptors leaving that battle group. They're not leaving, they were actually there and they just engaged a group of naval bombers, and they took a lot of damage. Now, King Convoy has gone in and has tried to tar pit our fleet. Now, I saw this coming because I have naval bombers out, so all I did was I deployed my submarines to counter tar pit. Now, I only had 2 with that group, so it's not a very effective one. If I had had more, I could have dealt more damage to his submarines here. So I dropped my submarines out behind, his submarines attacked them while my fleet ran away, and I've left the destroyers back there to destroy them, I guess. Do what destroyers do best, counter submarines. Now, back to that little bit of an air engagement, his aircraft did get incredibly close and they have dealt some damage to the fleet. That fleet right there lost a cruiser and a destroyer to his air operations, although I was able to counter, and I have left his air force in not necessarily a weakened position, but compared to mine I have double the aircraft now, so I am in a very strong position. So at this point in the battle, it's basically all over. I'm showing you the casualties, and the reason I'm showing the casualties here is because nothing really changes from this point. All that happens is I go on to regroup my fleet and move it up north in an attempt to catch an invasion fleet. So right after that battle of the submarines, I quickly realized that I spread myself too thin, I failed to scout and find the invasion group. My only chance now is to hope that it is still in the south, and I can get to the destination it needs to go before it does. Now, I do fail in that, and I was about 8 hours out, so if that puts into perspective, I was not even close to catching it. At that time of the battle with the subs, they must have been a distraction to slip through and push me further west, and it worked. So let's start by looking at the casualties and what we have left. Right now on screen you can see the units that both of us have available at the end of the game. So I was successful in sinking 6 of King's submarines and downing a significant portion of his aircraft. Of the 24 he started with, he only has 7 left. Of the 24 I started with, I still have 14. So I lost 10, he lost 16. That's good maths, right? No. He lost 17. He lost 17 aircraft, guys. That's better maths. So he lost more than I have remaining. So, and that is due to how he used his. He used his to attack a small portion of my fleet, and although he was successful in sinking 1 cruiser and 1 destroyer, he has lost a lot of his air superiority. Although he has won this, in any future engagements, it would be kind of hard to say who would win. Although I'm down on ships, I do still have air superiority, so any future engagements over him would kind of swing towards my favor, especially if I could take out his aircraft. I could have air superiority and eliminate his ability to scout, but that was not what this battle is about. So although I dealt more casualties and inflicted more damage on him, he successfully got his invasion fleet to its destination. So in hindsight, looking back on it and talking to King after the battle, I actually at one point apparently did find the invasion fleet, although I didn't see it. At the time I was playing PUBG and I was probably winning and too distracted to look at my screen. So there's a lesson in that, guys. Pay attention, really focus on your games at hand. I was blinded by my desire for chicken dinner that I missed the opportunity to sink King's invasion fleet. So in all honesty though, I was watching the game and I don't remember seeing it. So basically what he told me was that tactical bomber down there at one point did spot it, and he very quickly moved his invasion fleet. So it may not have been visible for long, but when it was there and when I had spotted it, he did quickly evade it. As I said at the start of the game, this was all about finding the invasion fleet. If I was able to find the invasion fleet and intercept it, I stood a chance, but as soon as it slipped past me, due to its speed, it was all over. The only ships I had that could catch it, really, were my destroyers, and even then, with his invasion fleet out there, my destroyers aren't going to do all that much. So it was a very good challenge and a very good experience, and going forwards from this, I've learnt a few things. So the way I deploy my aircraft was very good for scouting large areas really quickly, but I left them vulnerable to be picked off by King's interceptors, and although I was able to deal crippling blows when he was attacking my fleet directly through good defense, I lost a lot of aircraft unnecessarily. So I need to change my scouting formation and be more observant when it comes to whereabouts his fleet is. If I had of early on in the game noticed he was destroying my scouts, I could have changed my pattern. I could have sent interceptors out to actually defend. So you'll notice that when I did finally attack his group when they were attacking my fleet, I had a stack of 5 interceptors. If I had been able to assemble that earlier, I could have definitely dealt a crippling blow to his aircraft sooner. So GG to King, you win this round, buddy, but I'll get you in the next.